الحمد لله إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونتوب إليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ذو الجبروت والكبرياء وأشهد أن سيدنا ونبينا محمدا عبده ورسوله إمام الأتقياء اللهم صل وسلم وبارك عليه وعلى آله وصحبه الأصفياء يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما أما بعد فإن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله وخير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار ثم أما بعد. Verily all praise and glory is due to Allah Azza wa Jal. We praise Him, we seek His aid and His assistance, and we ask Allah Azza wa Jal to forgive us for our evil actions. Whoever Allah Azza wa Jal guides, there is none who can misguide him. And who has ever went astray, following his own desires, then there is none who can set him aright or guide him to the Sirat al-Mustaqim, the straight path, except for Allah Azza wa Jal. I bear witness that there are no gods in reality worthy to be worshipped except for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I bear witness that Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa ala alihi wa sallam is his slave and final messenger sent to all of humanity. And as to what follows, O you who believe, fear Allah, the fear He is deserving, and do not die except being Muslims. O mankind, fear your Lord who created you from a single soul, and from that soul created its mate, and from them both spread forth many men and women. And fear Allah from whom you demand things from one another. And do not cut ties with the wounds that bore you, for indeed Allah Azza wa Jal is ever watchful over you. O you who believe, fear Allah and say just words. He will rectify your situation. He will forgive you for your sins. And he who obeys Allah and His Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam has already achieved the greatest achievement. And as to what follows, verily the most truthful speech is the speech of Allah Azza wa Jal. And the best of guidance is the guidance of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And the most detested of matters are those which are newly invented. And every newly invented matter is an innovation, and every innovation is in the hellfire. And as to what follows, before I want to start with the topic of the khutbah, ya ikhwani, I just want to give a little bit of an advice, which I see happening in a lot of the masajid across the world. Here in the Arab lands, everywhere you go, you'll see the people doing this because they just do not have the information. When we come to the Bayt of Allah, when we come to the house of Allah Azza wa Jal, and we're waiting for the salat, or we're sitting and we're listening to the khutbah, do not sit with your hands, with your fingers folded in. The Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam saw a man doing this when during the khutbah, waiting for the salah, and he took the man's hands and he pulled them apart. And he said, Shaitan hides in between your hands when they're crossed. So try to keep this in mind. If you're in the masjid waiting for the salah, if you're listening to the khutbah, do not put your fingers crossed. And I know a lot of us do it because we're unaware. We do not have the information. But now you do, inshallah ta'ala. Do not fold your fingers and allow shaitan to hide in between your fingers. Barakallahu feekum wa jazakum Allahu khairan. And the reminder benefits the believers. If you already knew that, the reminder benefits the believers. One day Umar ibn Khattab, Amir al-Mu'mineen, radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, was sitting in one of the houses of Medina. And he was sitting with a group of the companions of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And he said to them, what would one of you wish? What is your wish? One of them said, my wish is that I wish this house was filled with gold, so I could use that gold and I could spend it to make jihad and spend it in the cause of Allah Azza wa Jal. Then another companion said, I wish this house was filled with jewels and rubies, so I can use that rubies and jewels to spend on the Muslims, to spend for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal. Umar ibn Khattab responded and said, if I had one wish, I would wish that this house was filled with men filled with men, the like of Abu Ubaidah, Amr ibn al-Jarrah, or Mu'adh ibn Jabal, or Salim, Mawla Abi Hudhayfa, so that I could use these men and I can use them to spread the deen of Allah Azza wa Jal, to propagate the deen of Allah. His wish was different than them other companions. But first of all, we want to stop and just look at how the companions would think. Everything, every thought, every action that they had was for the cause of Allah Azza wa Jal. This is how their mind worked. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to rectify our situation and to make us have iman and to think like they thought. Umar al-Khattab knew that this gold eventually it would run out and you would need more money to spend. These jewels, these rubies, whatever money you get for them and spend out, eventually that is going to wear out. But with these men, like the Amin of the Ummah, Abu Ubaidah Amr ibn Jarrah, the Amin of this Ummah, the trustworthy of this Ummah, Mu'adh ibn Jabal, the leader of the ulama on Yawm al-Qiyamah, and Salim, Mawla Abi Hudhayfa, one of those companions where the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, take the Quran from him. He knew that the only way to revive this deen, the only way to establish the deen of Allah Azza wa Jal, to make this ummah firm, to make this society firm, is through men. But not any men, ya ikhwani, real men who are dedicated, real men who have true iman in Allah Azza wa Jal, real men who believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the way He is to be believed in. Know, ya ikhwani, that true men are very rare. Very rare. Next to none. As the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, إِنَّمَا النَّاسِ كَالْإِبِلِ لَا تَكَادُ تَجِدُ فِيهَا رَاحِلًا. That the human being, the men, are like camels. You will barely find one camel in there that you will be able to ride. In another narration, he says sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, مِئَةٍ لا يجد رجل فيها راحلة. Out of 100, it would be difficult for a man to find just one to ride. And he made the similitude between men. Because we have a lot of men, but do we have real men? Do we have real men? These are the backbone of a society, of a community. These are the foundation of a community. Without real men, then the community would be nothing. Real men for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is why Omar wished this instead of wishing for gold, instead of wishing for rubies. Inshallah ta'ala, I am pleased to see a lot of youth in the masjid. And because school started next week, I kind of figured that I would see more children in the masjid today than before. And the kids know that I love to address them and I love to focus on them. Because the youth are the future of the ummah. And we want these youth, these young brothers, to grow up to be men? No. We want them to grow up to be real men. Real men like Omar. Real men like Abu Ubaidah. Real men like Mu'adh ibn Jabal. Real men like the Sahaba of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wasallam. But sad to say, the situation of our youth in the Muslim Ummah is a situation which is displeasing for the most part. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, we see the revival and we see a lot of the youth having the zeal for the deen of al-Islam, but at the same time, we see the majority of the youth going astray and being misled. The youth are of three types, ya ikhwani. Three types. The youth which is upright. The youth which believes in Allah Azza wa Jal. The youth which is connected to the deen of Allah Azza wa Jal. The youth which does righteous deeds, and the youth which loves the deen of Allah. And know, ya ikhwani, young men, that from this, you will be from one of those who will be shaded on the day of judgment. When the Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam says about those 7 who will be shaded on the day of judgment, a day where there will be no shade except for the shade of Allah, he mentioned one of them. He said, Shabun nasha fi ta'atillah. One of them was a young man who was brought up upon the obedience of Allah Azza wa Jal. So you young men who are steadfast, who are obedient upon the deen of Allah, stay steadfast. Stay steadfast. And inshallah ta'ala, we ask Allah to make from you from one of those who will be shaded under the throne of Ar-Rahman. Yawm al-Qiyamah, the day there will be no shade except for the shade of Allah. Then we have the other kind of youth. The youth which is wretched, which is wicked, which doesn't listen to the commandments of Allah Azza wa Jalla or His Messenger, and just does whatever he wants and follows his hawa, follows his desires. And then the third group, which we will find the majority of our youth falling in, are those youth which are confused. They are getting Islamic instruction at home. They are getting Islamic instructions in school, but then they are influenced by the outside world. They are influenced by the filth, the garbage that they see on TV. They are influenced by the garbage that they hear on the radio, wa'iyadhu billah, if they listen to the radio. This is the majority of the youth, confused. But what we want to do, inshallah ta'ala, is clarify what is a man, what is a real man according to al-Islam. And this isn't something which is just only geared to the youth, but it is something which all of us, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, can take a benefit from. But to the youth, who is a man? Who is a real man? Is it that man who's driving that BMW? Is it that guy who's wearing that Gucci and wearing all these nice clothes? Is he the man? Is the man the one who goes through women with no respect? Is that the man? Is the man the one who curses all the time and walks around like he's a tough guy? Is that a man? Is the man the one who can knock someone out with one punch? Is that what a man is? That's not what a man is. The Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam was sitting with his companions, and he asked them, who is stronger? Who is the one who was the strongest? They said, he is the one who can overpower him. The one who can overpower him. This is what they understood what the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam meant. Who was the strongest? But the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam says, no, this is not the strongest of men. Rather, the man who is strong is the one who can hold himself when he is angry. When he is angry. The real men, ya ikhwani, are the ones who follow the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam. The real men are those people who respect women. The real men are those people who protect their ears from listening to things that aren't pleasing to Allah Azza wa Jalla. Real men are those who respect their elders. Real men are those who establish a salah. Real men are those people who enjoin the good and forbid the evil. These are real men. These are real men. Not these fake tough guys that can just pull out a gun and end someone's life and they think that they're a tough guy. One time Abdullah ibn Mas'ud was climbing up a date palm tree in Mecca, and the other companions looked at his legs, and Abdullah ibn Mas'ud was very frail. He wasn't big in stature, he was skinny. So they started to laugh him, and they started to mock at his legs as he was going up because of how scrawny and skinny they were. And the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, don't laugh, because I swear by him in whose hand my soul is, his feet on the scales on Yawm al-Qiyamah are more heavier than Jabal Uhud. Than Jabal Uhud. Why? What are one of the things Abdullah bin Mas'ud did? Abdullah bin Mas'ud was one of those first companions who went to the Kaaba, the house of Allah Azza wa Jalla, and recited the Quran out loud until he was beating up so severely by the mushrikeen that he was unable to see. He went back to the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam in this state. The Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam felt bad for him. He said, it's nothing, Ya Rasulullah. This is nothing. I will go tomorrow and I will do it. Even though he was scrawny, even though he was small, he was what? A real man. A real man. On the Yawm al-Qiyamah, his scrawny legs, his scrawny physique will weigh more than the Jabal of Uhud. Of Uhud. This is what we have to understand, ya ikhwani. What are real men? And in this ummah, in this nation of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, Ummah al-Islam, we do not need more men. I mean in quantity, because we do not go by quantity, rather we go by quality. What is the quality of the men? If you look at these early Muslims, the Sahaba, and the things which they achieved and those along with them, they were only a small number when compared to those people who they faced, which were hundreds of thousands of people. So as Muslims, we don't want quantity, rather what we need is quality. And these real men, ya ikhwani, these real men are worth more than their weight in gold. More than their weight in gold. When Khalid ibn Walid, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, Sayfullah Maslul, was surrounding Hira, and he wrote to Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, Khalifa to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahibu sallam, and told him, I need reinforcements. Send me reinforcements. So Abu Bakr as-Siddiq sent him a delegation, people to join the army who will fight with the Muslims. And Khalid ibn Walid saw this number being small. But Abu Bakr as-Siddiq said, you have one person in an army, Qaqa' ibn Amr, who is worth 1,000 men. No army will be defeated that has Qaqa' ibn Amr in it. His voice, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq said, his voice is equal to 1,000 men. To 1,000 men. This is one man. And we're not even talking about, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq wasn't even talking about his physical stature. He was talking just alone about the voice of Qaqa' bin Amr. So if it's a man, more than his weight in gold. His voice alone worth more than 1,000 soldiers. When Abdullah bin Amr bin As was surrounding Misr, Egypt, before the Muslims went and they conquered Egypt, he wrote to Amir al-Mu'mineen, Umar al-Khattab, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, and told him, we need reinforcements. We need reinforcements. Send us some help from Medina. Abu Bakr, Umar al-Khattab sent him men from Medina. It was a small number of men, just like those that were sent to Khalid ibn Walid. But he told Abdullah bin Amr bin As that in this army, there are 4 men. 4 men in this army. Each one of those men are equal to 1,000. The first being Zubayr bin Awam, Miqdad bin Amr, Ubad bin Samit, and Maslama bin Makhlad. These men, even though they were just 1 man, they were equal to 1,000 men. Why? Because they were real men. They were real men who had iman in Allah Azza wa Jal. Real men who implemented the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Real men who dedicated their life. Real men who sacrificed for the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No, ya ikhwani, that being a man doesn't mean that you have a beard or doesn't mean that you have a mustache. If this is the case, then we have way too many of them. Being a man is not, we don't judge manhood by age. Just because you're young does not mean that you can be a man. Look at Abdullah ibn Zubayr, radiyallahu ta'ala anhuma. One time Abdullah ibn Zubayr was playing in the streets of Medina with a group of young companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and Umar ibn al-Khattab was walking down the street. And like we said before, you know the personality of Umar. How Umar, yes, he was compassionate, but if he would see the commands of Allah Azza wa Jalla being broken, he would be very harsh. So because of him being so stern, the children, when they would see Umar ibn Khattab walking down the street, they would walk away. They would run away. So all the children ran away except for Abdullah ibn Zubayr. Abdullah ibn Zubayr stood right there. So Umar ibn Khattab went up to him and said, why didn't you run away like your other companions run away? Abdullah ibn Zubayr told him, I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't do anything wrong which would cause me to run away from you. And there's enough room on the road for you to pass. So this is a reason why I didn't run away. And he said, Umar al-Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu, you are the son of your father. You are the son of your father, Zubayr bin Awam radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Zubayr bin Awam, who was a real man, who was from the Ashar al-Mubashirin bin Jannah, from those 10 amongst the companions of the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam who were given glad tidings of Jannah. But he nurtured in his son Abdullah this feeling of manhood. If you look during the battle of the Yarmouk, when the Muslims were fighting in Sham, Zubayr bin Awam went and told a group of those Muslims who were fighting, who is going to pledge allegiance with me today upon maut, upon death? A group of the fighters came with him. They went into the thickest of the battle, and the only one who came out was Zubayr bin Awwam. Then, a second time, he went to them and said, who is going to pledge allegiance with me on this day to get shahada, to die fi sabilillah? Another group went with him, and they went into the thickness of the battle, and the only one to come out was Zubayr bin Awwam, radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Until he said a third time, who is going to pledge allegiance with me this day upon Maut and get shahada? No one came forward. No one. Because they saw the first two groups that went out, no one came back except for Zubayr bin Awwam. So what does Zubayr bin Awwam do? He grabbed his son Abdullah, who at that time was 10 years old, put him on his horse and ran in the thickness of the battle and came out with his son Abdullah. See, Zubayr bin Awwam was like Khalid ibn Walid, where they could control the horse with their legs. So they didn't need their hands to grab the reins. They could control the horse with their legs. So what kind of effect did this have on Abdullah bin Zubayr? This is why he was the way he was with Umar al-Khattab. And this is why Umar al-Khattab told him, you are the son. You are the son of your father. Because his father instilled in him those characteristics of being a man. Of being a man. And to the young youth, being a man. Not wa'yadu billah, walking around with tight clothes like a woman. Or walking around wa'yadu billah with your pants hanging off of your body so everybody can see your underwear, astaghfirullah. This is not a man. This is not a man. Rather, the man is the one, like we said, believes in Allah, follows the commandments of Allah Azza wa Jal. And this is what us as fathers need to instill in our youth. I'm not saying we have to bring up, a generation of brutes, of tough kids, but I'm saying we need to put and instill in them what it is to be a man. Because in Islam, the deen of Islam supports manlyhood. Supports manlyhood. One of the great ulama, Bakr bin Zayd, when he wrote his book, Hilyat Talib al-Ilm, he said that for the Talib al-Ilm, for the person who is learning Islamic knowledge, he needs to show those characteristics of manlyhood, of being a man. In Abu Dawood, there's a chapter called Al-Rujula, manhood, where the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam forbid a man from always combing his hair like a woman. Because Islam supports manlyhood, men acting like men. And this was Abdullah bin Zubayr, a young boy, but he was like a man. One time, a delegation came into the Khalifa of the Umayyads, Hisham ibn Abdul Malik, and they needed some help from the Khalifa. So the person who led that delegation was a young man, And the Khalifa, Hisham, said, is there not an older one amongst you who can speak on behalf of you except for this young man? And what did this wise aqil, this young man who had intellect, say to Hisham ibn Abdul Malik? He said that if it was for the fact that the leader of the people, the virtue is in their age. The virtue is in the age. The people lead people because of their age. Then there would have been many people who are more deserving of the khilafah than you. It is not age which makes a person a man. It is not age which makes a person mature. Rather, it is the person obeying Allah Azza wa Jal. It is the person following the sunnah of the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wasallam. And I'm talking to you young men. You need to be young men, inshallah ta'ala. You need to shun the evilness and the sicknesses of this society and hold firm to the book of Allah Azza wa Jal. Especially with the new school year starting. Those of you who have finished the memorization of the Quran, inshallah ta'ala, this year you have to make it your goal to be sharp. To be sharp. I want to take what I memorized and I want to be perfect at it. If you didn't memorize the book of Allah Azza wa Jal, then what you need to do is set goals for yourself this year and memorize what you need to memorize. In math, in science, in history, in reading, arithmetic, whatever you do, excel and be the best. Because this is what the Muslim Ummah needs to be. We don't want to just lead the people in the deen. We want to lead the people in all knowledges. And this is how the Ummah was in its early years. religious knowledge and secular knowledge, we were at the height. We were at the pinnacle. So hold firm to the deen of Allah, O youth of al-Islam. Hold firm to the deen of Allah Azza wa Jal, and do not err and do not worry about what other young kids your age are doing, and do not be deceived what the media, what the music industry portrays of what a man is, because you and I both know what a man is. And a man is who Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam was. Men were those companions who were with the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam. These are the people who we want to be like, and these are the people who we want to see our youth growing up to be. أقول قولي هذا أستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين من كل ذنب فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. الحمد لله إن الحمد لله كما ينبغي لجلال وجهه ولعظيم سلطانه وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. Inshallah, for the fathers, for those of you who have young men, those of you who want to bring up your children to be young men, good Muslims, and I don't think that there is a father who is sitting in this masjid except that they want the best for their son. I don't think there is a father who is sitting in this masjid and says, you know what, I want my son to make rap music when he gets older. I want my son to walk with his pants hanging off his backside, showing his underwear. I don't think there's any man in this masjid who wants that for their son. But rather, what I believe and have the husn al-dhan, a good thought in all of my brothers, that what they want their sons to be is good Muslims. That what they want their sons to be inheritors of Jannah. Because in the end, this is what we work for. We work for Jannah. We don't work for a big house. We don't work for a fat paycheck. We work for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we work for Jannah. Because this is the dar, this is the house which will last forever, while this house that we live in is only temporarily. But there are steps, inshallah ta'ala, which we can go about cultivating this manlyhood inside of our young men. The first one is what the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam would do to some of his young companions, is that he would give them nicknames. He would give them nicknames, like the brother of Anas ibn Malik, whose name was Abu Umayr. He was given this kunya by the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, Abu Umayr. And Abu Umayr was only about 2 or 3 years old at that time. The Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam went to his house because he knew that he had a bird that had died. So he knew that the child was upset. So he went to the child and said, Abu Umayr, ma fa'ala bin Nughayr. Nughayr was the name of the bird. What happened with your bird an-Nughayr? He gave him the name Abu Umayr to put in his characteristic, put in his self those characteristics of manlyhood. Even though he was a young child, Abu Umayr, the father of Umayr. And the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam always cared about the feelings of his Sahaba, even his young Sahaba. Let's look at the context of this story. The young Sahabi, Abu Umayr, has a bird that dies. What if we had a child that had a bird that died? We say, khalas, flush it down the toilet, throw it in the garbage. It's just a bird. He's going to forget about it in a month. The Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam took time out of his busy schedule to go and meet this young Sahabi who was only 2 years old and ask him about his bird that he knew died. Because he knew the feelings of this young Sahabi was important in cultivating the characteristics of manlyhood, in cultivating good morals inside of this man, inside of this young boy, to show him that I care. And this is what we must show to all our sons. If something small, insignificant in our eyes, but maybe in their eyes, something which happens to them is devastating, just like Abu Umayr. And this is why the Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam went to meet him. Another woman whose name was Khalid. She was very young. She said the Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam had a nice qamis and he wanted to give it to me, and they brought me carrying me. She was very young. So this is what the Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam would do to his young companions, give them these nicknames as the father of or the mother of, to instill in them the characteristics of being an adult, of having some type of responsibility. Also, number 2, bring your kids to the masajids. Bring your kids to the house of Allah Azza wa Jal. Do not just leave them at home all the time. Bring them. bring them to the Bayt of Allah. Bring them to benefit. Let them sit in the lesson. Even if they don't understand what the Shaykh is saying, they are there. They are there. And that is going to have a big effect on the development of their character, development of their personality. Just them sitting there, they'll remember, you know what, when I was young, I remember my father used to bring me to the masjid and we used to listen to the Shaykh. You know what, I don't really remember what the Shaykh used to say, but I remember being in Allah's house and I remember being with my father, and that had a big impact on who I am. It was said by one of the companions of the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, Muawiyah ibn Qarrah, that when we used to go and sit with the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, the companions of the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam used to bring their children with them. They used to bring their children with them, and their children would sit behind them. So this was how the Sahaba would do. They would bring their children to the house of Allah. Now, I'm not saying that you bring your kid, the lecture is about an hour and a half long, and you make them sit there all day. I'm not saying that. Let them play. Let them play basketball. Let them run around. But let them sit for a little bit, just so they can be in that environment of Iman, so it can have an effect on the child's development. Telling them stories of the Sahaba, just like the stories that we're talking about now. The stories of Zubair ibn Awam, the stories of the Khulafa al-Rashidin, giving them role models. Give them role models. If we do not give our children role models, ya ikhwani, they're going to choose their own role models. If we don't give it to them. Every human being, no matter how proud or arrogant the person might be, there's always someone that you copy. The person who we want to copy is the Nabi of Allah, Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and his companions. And these are the same people who we want our children to copy. And if we don't give them these role models, if we don't tell them the stories of the Sahaba, if we don't tell them the stories of the great ulama, the great Muslims who came before us, they're going to pick the likes of Lil Wayne, wa'iyadu billah. They're going to pick the likes of these mujrimun, of these criminal, of these khubatha, of these filthy people on the radio, on the TV, that all they talk about is disrespecting women, getting money, and selling drugs. This is the reality. This is the reality. If you come from India, if you come from Egypt, if you come from Pakistan, no matter where you're coming from, this is your reality now. You're living in America. You're living in America, and the kids are faced with different adversities in America than they're going to be faced with in Pakistan and India. This is just the reality of the situation. So we must find role models for them before they get their role models from these filthy people off of the streets. Also, respect them in public. Just because it's a young kid, just because they're young, doesn't mean that they feel some type of way, that they have some type of anger or resentment when you treat them little or you disrespect them amongst the people. This is very important, very, very important. As the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, it was recorded by Sahl ibn Sa'd that one time the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam was brought a cup to drink, and on his right side he had the youth, a young man, and on his left side he had the shuyukh, he had the elders. He took a drink of the cup and he told the young man, do not let me pass this cup to these elders until I first pass the cup to you. And the man, this young man said, I didn't give up my turn in drinking that cup, drinking from that water after the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, because the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, we know, had barakah. Drinking from that cup, getting some of his saliva in your mouth, this is barakah. And the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam put this first with the young man. And when I say barakah, blessing, this is a barakah, a blessing from Allah Azza wa Jalla. Not from the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, even though it is his saliva. This is a blessing which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put barakah in the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wasallam. Also, when the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam in Medina, when they would harvest the date palm trees and they would bring down those fresh ripe dates, and before they would distribute it to the people of Al-Medina, the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, bring the young men, bring the young children, and I will distribute it and disperse it first to the young children. Why? Respecting them. respecting them, respecting their rights, treating them like young adults. Do not talk to your son, do not talk to your daughter like they're little kids. Talk to them like they're mature. I'm not saying tell them everything. No, I'm not saying that. But respect them, especially when they're in public. When they see you respecting them, they will have this feeling of dignity. They will have this feeling that they are someone who is dignified, and this will cultivate that feeling of manlyhood, cultivate this feeling of maturity within their personalities. Take the kids, get them involved in sports. Get them involved in sports. That's one thing I love about al-minhaal. I always see the kids playing basketball. MashaAllah, tabarakallah. As long as that basketball does not interfere with your salah. Know when the adhan is called, take that basketball. I'm going to put the basketball down right now. I'm going to get myself calm, cool, collected. I'm going to make wudu, and then I'm going to make salah. But playing sports, when I was young, a little personal thing about me growing up, I played football. Played football my whole life. I was a wrestler. Me and my brothers, all of my cousins, we were wrestlers. We were football players. We were tough. This made us tough. And this is what we want the young men to be. We don't want them to be sissies, we don't want them to be soft. We want them to be strong. We want them to be able to hold themselves and defend themselves. But we don't want them to be people who oppress. But we want them to be strong. Also, keep your sons away from those things which might make them feminine. Especially what we see nowadays. And this is reality. Like I said, this is the reality. If you have a teenage kid, you see what these kids are doing now. They're wearing tight pants. The pants are hanging off of them. This is a fad which is doing nothing but destroying the youth and putting those characteristics of femininity inside of them. When we want them to be like men and we want to cultivate them like men. Also, put the zeal, put the love of the deen of al-Islam inside of your children. Inside of your children, and respect them. And respect them. And know that just because they're young, just because he's young, just because this kid right here is 15 years old, maybe 14, it doesn't mean that he can't be a young man. It doesn't mean that he can't be a young man because of his age. Look at Zayd bin Thabit. How old was Zayd bin Thabit when he was brought by Abu Bakr and Omar to compile the Quran? Abu Bakr and Omar were his elders, were older than him. Zayd bin Thabit was only about 20 years old, in his early 20s. And he said, of course, first of all, we'll not do anything which the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam didn't do until they convinced him that this is something which they need to do, was compile the book of Allah. But Omar ibn Khattab and Abu Bakr weren't like, you know what, he's only a young kid. Khalas, we don't need him. No, they knew his merit. They knew his fadl. They knew that even though he was young, he was a man. He was a man. Look at Osama bin Zayd, his son, the son of Zayd bin Thabit. When the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam put him at the head of a delegation to go fight the Romans. At that time, how old was Osama bin Zayd? 18 years old. 18 years old, and he was leading in that expedition the kibar, the big Sahaba. But the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam knew that even though he was young, he was a man. He was a man. So just because you're young, ya ikhwani, just because you're 15, just because 16, 17, maybe even younger, it doesn't mean that you can't be a man. And just because I'm old here, just because we have some of the people that have some gray in their beard, it doesn't mean that they are men. Because you have some people who have long, big gray beards, but their minds are just like children. Their minds are just like children. So I ask Allah Azza wa Jal to develop that characteristic of manlyhood in our youth. I ask Allah Azza wa Jal to make our youth from amongst those people who will revive the ummah. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make our youth from the memorizers of the Quran. I ask Allah Azza wa Jal to make our youth from the leaders of the secular knowledge. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to rectify the condition of the Muslim ummah, the youth of the Muslim ummah in every single land across the whole entire world. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وزد وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. عباد الله، إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. فاذكروا الله كثيرا يذكركم واشكروه على آلائه ونعمه يزدكم ولذكر الله أكبر والله يعلم ما تصنعون وأقيموا الصلاة.